All right, we're focused on dueling rallies. To the left of your screen, of course, the CPAC event still going on here. They're preparing to hear from the President of the United States in a little bit more than half an hour from now. On the right of your screen, Bernie Sanders in Brooklyn, New York. He's holding a rally to let folks know a little bit more about him and his personal life story. In the meantime, Ellis and Barbara at the White House on what we can expect out of the president at CPAC a little bit more, as I said, a half hour from now. Ellison.
Hey, Neil. Yeah, we expect to hear from President Trump in about half an hour. Typically, when he speaks at rallies, speaks to crowds of supporters, the president rarely sticks to a script. He tends to talk about things that he sees as successes in his administration. He often talks about unemployment, the economy, plans for building a wall at the southern border, and then criticizes Democrats for not supporting his agenda. Today, we don't know exactly what Mr. Trump will focus on, but there's a chance we saw hints of it when his vice president addressed the Conservative Political Action Conference yesterday. Vice President Pence focused on Democrats, trying to link them to far-left ideas, telling those at the conference that Senator Bernie Sanders, a self-described Democratic socialist, is a leading presidential contender in 2020 and that the rest of the Democratic Party is following in his footsteps.
Democrats are embracing the same tired economic theories that have impoverished nations and stifled the liberties of millions over the past century. That system is socialism. What they're actually offering is just more of the same. More taxes, more spending, more government, and less freedom. And as the president said 24 days ago, so we must say with one voice, America will never be a socialist country.
So we'll see if President Trump follows that similar path of trying to politically damage Democrats by trying to lump them all together under an umbrella of socialism, or if he decides to go the route of talking about more specific ideas and policy goals of this administration. Neil?
All right, Ellison, thank you very, very much. Let's get the read on all of this. And the Democrats are jumping into the race, including Bernie Sanders, who's going to eagerly tell his life story. The governor of Washington State entering the race. Joe Biden maybe later on next week. Beto O'Rourke maybe on next week. Most of them are of the view here that the government can and should do more, which means the spending can and should be more. CPA Dan Geltrude, of course, the karma guy, S&P Global Portfolio Manager Aaron Gibbs, and Fox News contributor Jonas Max Ferris. Jonas, who's resonating right now? Because to a man or woman, the distinction is they want the government to do more than certainly Donald Trump. So who's impacting whom?
Okay, this new element that's rising in the Democratic Party is getting all the attention, but the actual party, when they do polls, the Democratic Party actually wants to be more centrist. However, on Twitter, with the media, with the it looks like everybody's behind AOC, and she's a big star, and she's driving a lot of attention.
But do your market pals worry about that message or no?
I don't think so, because there's no path for that to go anywhere, because the majority of people aren't for it. You're not going to, I mean, socialism isn't going to take off with this low unemployment rate, with the market high. There's too much good. There's too much good that people don't want to mess up. No one wants to rock a boat that severely. That said, it can drive you through. In fact, it might help because it'll get you through a primary, but then you're going to lose a general election because it's not moderate enough. The party's already having problems, although they're getting a lot of attention. They're starting priority tests and essentially putting people on lists, and it's getting very confrontational internally, and it's very difficult to be a moderate and climb now. But it's the moderates who would actually win and get policies that would increase taxes and spending, but at a level that is normal. Let's put it that way. The policies that are being thrown around now are not going to go anywhere because they're not going to ever win. They're never going to get the public behind them. They never get voted on. There's too many people that don't want to do those things.
But there's a general assumption that none of those candidates has a chance against the president, built into that market premise. I can remember people saying the same about Donald Trump. I can remember people saying the same even about Ronald Reagan. I can remember Jimmy Carter folks hoping he would be the nominee because they could smash him like a bug. We know what happened.
Yes. And interestingly, that Jimmy Carter's election was the one election that had 17 Democratic primaries. And so that's the only time that we've seen this many candidates during the primaries.
In 76, not the one in 80.
Yeah.
Where his principal challenger was Ted Kennedy.
Exactly. So that came after Watergate. So that was why there were just, so many candidates coming up. So I think Well, once we finally start seeing the Democratic primaries, some of the debates come through, maybe calmer heads might prevail. But to your point, yeah, I mean, it's the extreme values that are getting the media attention, the extreme proposals. And so until we really see all of them on the stage, we see all of the views, maybe then we can start to see more of the mainstream candidates that might really potentially win.
You know, incumbent in that argument, Dan, if you think about it, is a world that's different from the one we're living in. I mean, you would almost think this is the Depression. Instead, record low unemployment, record levels of jobs for almost all key demographic groups. The market's doing very well, corporate earnings doing very, very well. So I know there is this detachment sometimes that can exist in the mainstream media, and some people don't like the president, fine. But you can't really argue with the economic environment right now.
Yeah, you can't. And I think Jonas's point was right in terms of the economy is just too strong right now for socialism to grab hold. And I think if you look at this as all politics is local, look at what's going on with some of these states and how government is expanding and taxing, like New York, New Jersey, states like that. And what are you seeing? Migration of wealth. And it's not only just wealth, it's other people are migrating out of these states. And I think if the Fed gets in that place of where they're going to grow government and it's going to be tax and spend, and we're going to start leaning towards socialism, although I don't think we're going there now. But at some point, if fortunes reverse, we can go that way. I think you're going to see an impact on the market, and you're going to see a migration of wealth accordingly.
Now, of course, Bernie Sanders' pitch, and he's going to have this event in New York City, is that you have not gotten a chunk of that. You have not been able to benefit from that. And that is his clarion call. The difference this time is that he has many more candidates echoing that theme, including many who weren't even born when he was first echoing it. What do you think?
Yeah, and I don't want to. Bernie Sanders started this whole thing. It's just that AOC is a more vibrant. I know you just mentioned a little while ago the parallels to Trump. You know, the world could change in a year. We could be in a recession that not our own fault. And all of a sudden, these ideas could take hold. AOC is a very powerful, dynamic personality, and she could actually shift what is the average in the Democratic Party left. She's that kind of a Trumpian quality, even though we disagree with the policies, they're bad for the economy. It doesn't mean they're not going to, they couldn't take hold in a certain environment that could happen next year. You know, but there's a lot of people running, and Bernie really did start this, and she, I believe, used to work for Bernie Sanders in his election. I just don't see right in the current
That's right,
year.
I forgot that.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you're like, oh, we dismissed it a few years ago, but these ideas build and build, and then you get an audience behind it, and all of a sudden, you're like, a few years later, you're like, what happened? We're having a 70% tax rate, and it's possible. But it also, you know, I think plays into Trump, because Trump in some ways is more centrist. Like, he can beat a very far left candidate because his policies they're not really that extreme. A lot of them are populist. They were things that Democrats wanted to do with tariffs, and there were actually things so I think he is going to see more.
Yeah, he's concerned for American workers and the jobs aren't shipped overseas. That is more keeping with the union movement and Democrats than it's typically a Republican crowd. Aaron, do you think that the markets are hearing this, though, and not liking the direction, whatever the politics, that if it, you know, we've got this record debt, it's to the point now where I think one party has called it a national security threat, Republicans, even though they've done little to address it. But that the worse this looks, the worse the prospects look for anyone advocating still more government.
There's certainly a concern, not right now when things are healthy, but that possibility that if we hit a recession and that risk, you know, increases, that's when that gets to be a real concern. So if we're advocating more and more spending, that's when the deficit really becomes a bigger concern. And so, yeah, there's definitely a fear in the markets that we want to get a hold of the, get the deficit a little more under control in case things go wrong. Right. And yeah, so there's a fear out there.
All right, guys, thank you very, very much. By the way, we did get a tweet from the president, a sign that he's watching. He makes a note of the issue that Kim Jong-un took better than a 3-day trip, according to the president, not the 2 hours that I believe I had mentioned. He is right about that. I did mean to say that it was a more onerous trip for the president to take because he had to fly halfway around the world, but the president is right to say that this guy taking a long train trip just as bad. He had to do that, that is Kim Jong-un, because he didn't want to look like he had to borrow a plane from the Chinese to get there. Be that as it may, the president's watching, and I think he likes this. A little more after this.
2, 1, fade away.
All right, today is the day we're told that Juan Guaido is going to try to get back in to Venezuela. He has been in Colombia, he popped up in Brazil, but he's not been able to get back into Venezuela because there was an order that no one could leave the country. He did, and now the question will be what happens when he tries to get back in. Steve Harrigan is in Caracas with the very latest. What will happen?
Neil, it's really not clear what's going to happen. Juan Guaido, as you said, has been bouncing all around South America. He's been to Colombia, then Brazil. He was in Paraguay yesterday. They rolled out the red carpet for him there, addressing him as Mr. President. But the man recognized as president by the U.S., by more than 50 other countries, really has little or no power inside this country. He was unable to get humanitarian aid into Venezuela despite a deadline and promises last week. And now it's not clear he'll be able to get himself back into Venezuela. He said he's going to be back by recent tweets as late as Monday, but he does face arrest. There was a travel ban put on him by the Maduro regime, as you mentioned, and he said the risk is even more than arrest. It could be life-threatening. So the man who the U.S. is calling president here, interim president, 50 other countries as well, might not even be able to get back into his own country, Neil.
I'm wondering, let's say he does, and if he's arrested on the spot, I would imagine that would make a tense situation a lot more so. And for Maduro, it would be a very risky move, right?
I think you're right to point out the questions that his arrest does raise. Really, you can ask, who would it be better for? Which side would it be better for? All we've seen Maduro be able to do on the ground here in Venezuela is lead protest marches, speak through a megaphone, and tweet. He says he's going to start enacting the duties of president as soon as he is on the ground here again. But it's impossible at this point to see that actually happening. Nicolas Maduro still controls all the levers of power, the military, the police, the courts. So throwing Juan Guaido into jail might be the biggest mistake that the Maduro government could make. It could really rally his supporters, both here in Venezuela and internationally. Let him lead the marches. Let him speak through a microphone. Let him keep going.
So in the meantime, these goodie bags or emergency supply bags that I think the Maduro government is providing, what has been the response among average Venezuelans getting their hands on that stuff?
I think it's much needed food. It's basic supplements. And opposition figures say this is a political weapon, that the government of Venezuela, the Maduro government, controls the distribution of food. So you basically get a big box once a month if you're a Venezuelan family. It has macaroni, it has lentils, it has powdered milk. And this is a country, despite its mineral resources and vast oil wealth, where the population is on the verge of starvation. So if the government is giving you a bag of lentils and macaroni every month, it has some real sway over whether you're going to march or not, Neil.
All right, be safe, Steve. Thank you very much. Steve Harrigan in Caracas, where things could get pretty tense over the next 48 hours. We'll watch it. Meanwhile, we're watching right now CPAC, where the President of the United States is about to address a packed audience, waiting to hear from him. We'll have more to this. Gets back into Colombia, as we were raising with Steve Harrigan. It's a distinct possibility, although it could make a bad situation a lot worse. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis. He's also the author of the book Alliance of Evil. Let me get your sense then, Colonel, about where this is going. First off, in Venezuela, and how we react if, for example, Guaido is arrested coming back into the country.
Yeah, Neil, I think that we're in for the long haul. Just yesterday, Maduro moved his state oil company headquarters from Portugal to Moscow. And our friends, the Indians, are buying 650,000 barrels of oil a day from Venezuela. That money is going back to buy those packets of food that Maduro is giving out to the people, and also to keep his military operational. So he's dug his heels in. He sees, I think, because of what Moscow is doing, they're following the same thing they did in eastern Ukraine and Syria, the same type of template, and that is, bolster up a dictator, assure him and his military they're going to stand behind them, and he does. Now, our credibility is at stake here, and that's why China and both Moscow are pushing Maduro to, in our face, do the sorts of things he's doing. I don't know if Guaido is going to come back into the country and he's going to be released, as Steve suggests. That would be nice, but I think Maduro is going to do something before he even gets across that line.
Colonel, if I can switch to North Korea right now, many are wondering what came and happened to make the talks fall apart the way they did. The president walking away from the table, as you know. The North Koreans say that they walked away from the table. The president says that that's because the North Koreans wanted all sanctions lifted. They say they only wanted some of the sanctions lifted. I have no idea, but I'm curious what you make of what happens now.
Yeah, I would watch where the train goes on its way back to Pyongyang. Probably going to stop in Beijing, and President Xi's going to counsel the young leader about the next step. Beijing has everything interest here, and I suspect when President Xi comes to meet with President Trump later this month, that likely this will be a topic. But, keep in mind, since 2011, there have been 85 missile tests and 4 nuclear tests. Those took place, the last 2 in 2017. We need from them, positive steps toward denuclearizing, not just destroying the Yongbyon site, because we know they've been enriching uranium this past year to the tune of enough to make 5 to 7 new bombs. And so I think the president was very wise. He walked away because we didn't get, as President Reagan said, using the Russian proverb, trust and verify, we didn't get that from young Chairman Kim. And so we need that next time. I suspect there will be a next time. I suspect there will be no more testing, at least until there's a next time. And then, of course, the underlings are going to negotiate a deal that we can all live with. So I'm rather upbeat about this. I don't take this at all as a negative move.
Colonel, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Otto Warmbier story, and the parents of Otto Warmbier, of course, who later died after being held captive by the North Koreans. They took great exception to the president accepting at face value Kim Jong-un, claiming no responsibility for it. The president later came out to say, of course, North Korea was responsible, but he did not say Kim Jong-un was. What do you make of all that?
Kim Jong-un knew what was going on. He probably gave permission for the people that did the terrible things to the young man. Nothing happens in a dictatorship like that has international attention without the supreme leader knowing about it.
Then why did the president say that?
I think the president gets into the moment too much and sometimes tries to ingratiate himself with his counterpart. And I suspect this is what happened.
But he ingratiates himself with Kim Jong-un. He ingratiates himself with Vladimir Putin, maybe for all the reasons to foster talks. I get that. But do you think by putting his trust in known liars and bad men, he does this country a great disservice?
I think that he does, and that's my concern, and I hope that, when he meets with President Xi, who we know lies as well, that we keep pushing back. He met with Putin, obviously, last summer, and he needs to continue to push back. I think John Bolton understands this. Hopefully, he's having an influence over the president's thinking with regard to these international thugs, and I hope we're not soft on Maduro either. There's plenty of thugs around the world that need, somebody tough to be, and the president most of the time's tough, but occasionally he slips, and this incident, I think, was one of those instances.
Colonel, thank you very much. Always good chatting.
Thanks.
All right, we mentioned the president. He's getting ready to speak at CPAC. So is Bernie Sanders getting ready to speak, some would say, to his base. For Bernie Sanders, it's going to be to revisit his past and what made him who he is. For the president, well, we don't know. We'll just see. More to this. Brooklyn audience sort of tell his life story. Joe Borelli is back with us, so is Antoine C. Wright and Lee Carter. These are interesting venues because they each bring out their base, right, to that. For the president at CPAC, it's been an evolving relationship, but one now that's really nice, right?
Oh, yeah. This is Trump going to speak to his base, and it's a very important time for him because he's coming off some pretty tough things that happened this week. We had the Cohen testimony, we had the North Korea negotiations, which he's managed to reframe. I think what he's going to be doing right now is going to be going out there, reframing his week, re-energizing his base, talking about the wall. We'll probably hear some about that. We'll be hearing about the victory that he had in North Korea and standing strong for the American people. And I think it's important that he does that because there's been some wear and tear that's happened this week, for sure.
Let's switch to Bernie Sanders. He wants to reintroduce himself to the American public. Can politicians do that? Can you get a second shot at making a good first impression?
Well, I think Bernie has to. The fact of the matter is this race is more complicated than he thought originally. He had no idea that the party was going to be in this posture. He had no idea the type of candidates we have. So for him, it's going back to a place of comfort. It's going back to a place of relief. And it's going back to a place where he has nothing to lose because these people know him and they know him well. It's the same thing with Trump at CPAC. I mean, CPAC for him is a place of healing. It's a place of comfort. It's his comfort zone where he can go out and throw out right-wing red meat rhetoric because the people are hungry and thirsty for it. And it's a place of restoration because he's been bumped and bruised this week and over the past several weeks going back to the government shutdown.
It is interesting, Joe, when you think about whether a president faces internal challenges in his party. We know Governor Bill Weld, the former governor of Massachusetts, is going to challenge him. Maybe John Kasich, that's hard to say. But neither is really given much of a chance. Usually challenges to an incumbent president within a party go nowhere, but they mess up the party unity. Would you think that could happen here or no?
Sure, and that's why I think this speech is so important. He's trying to answer the question before it's even asked of whether he's still fundamentally popular with the base. This is going to be like singing in the shower for him. He is going to sound great in that room, and the crowd is going to go wild. He's immensely popular with Republican voters. He's immensely popular with conservative voters. If anything, he's changing the idea of conservatism more than conservatism is changing him. It would be tough to imagine Van Jones speaking about criminal justice reform had Donald Trump not been president. That would not have happened at CPAC.
You know, the post-North Korea effect here, I think he's still chafing a little bit about those in the media who've criticized him for that. You could also praise him for walking away from a table,
right.
And a bad deal is not better than no deal. But it's smarting enough to even say, as he corrected a comment I made on air about how long it took him to get to the summit site in Vietnam versus the time it took his counterpart to get there. So he's chafing about that.
He is chafing about that, and I think that he wants to get credit for walking away. This president is very different than other presidents. Most people, by the time, most presidents or leaders, that by the time they go to the negotiating table, they already know what the deal is. They're not going to make the deal out loud. They're not going to be doing this in front of people. He does things very publicly. I mean, you think about the government shutdown, what he did with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. He invited in the room and wanted everybody to see it. He wanted everybody to see this, and so the fact that he walked away as a sign of strength to him, he thought he was doing the right thing and expected to get applauded for it, and he didn't. And I think that's very, very frustrating to him. But I think that we're going to see that the Republicans and CPAC and all of these folks behind him are going to start lining up behind him and saying, you know what, no deal is much better than a bad deal, and I'm glad that he walked away.
But the one thing we know about Trump is he thrives off anger, confusion, frustration, and attention. And this week has given... Sounds like Cavuto 2.0.
I hear some baggage coming out.
So this week for him, and ending the week this way, is everything he wants because he knows going into next week, he will have the chance to frame what next week looks like starting today.
Right.
Because guess what? Cavuto and everybody else is going to chase whatever he said today, all the Kool-Aid that people would drink, all the red meat he would throw out, and people are going to be excited about it. And his base, including my dear friend here, are going to be really juiced up about what he did today and everything last week.
I'm juiced up. I'm juiced up.
There you go. It's the pre-juice.
What do you think, Joseph?
Look, you know, he has a really good case to make today, and I'm so glad he's doing it with the backdrop of Bernie speaking over in Brooklyn. He's going to echo what the vice president did, basically set the stage and frame 2020 as a choice between a party that stands for limited government, economic growth, versus the party, regardless of who wins, of sort of chaos and Medicare for all and Green New Deals and flatulent cows and Antoine's.
Well, the midterms were different because Congress was on trial right there, and I think the Conservative Party was a little upset with Congress for not delivering on passing and repealing Obamacare, amongst other things. The CPAC crowd is not blaming Donald Trump for things like that in the same way they blame Congress.
The CPAC crowd right now, just so you know, it's hard to see what's going on here, but they're playing, I guess, is it a tape, Pam, of showing socialist talking points on the part of prominent Democrats?
The Make America Scared Again technology.
Right.
The Make America Scared Again.
Or Make America Broke Again.
The same thing they did in 2008 when Barack Obama ran. The same thing they did in 2000.
But I mean, a lot of those policies, they
fair.
stepped in something here, right?
To be fair, the policies are a little bit scary. And the point of the Republicans right now is to say people need to be educated about what the problems and downfall with these policies are. I don't think that's the right approach for the Republicans to be taking right now, because the idea that this is too expensive or it hasn't worked before is not going to resonate with people who say, you know what, my health care doesn't work now and you didn't fix it.
You know what resonates? Having people like Sebastian Gorka personalize it into they're trying to take away your hamburgers and they're trying to take away your SUVs. I think that actually riles people up. We can laugh about it, sure, but does that actually rile people up? Does that address a fear in a way
At first, I didn't know what Gorka was doing there, but
it was about the flatulent cows. The flatulent cows.
That hit home with me.
It's only
because
I'm telling you, you're not appreciating the magnitude of that comment.
I'm not. Look, I've seen this movie before. Democrats, it's the same playbook. Look, scare people.
Well, I've seen the move before out of Democrats espousing a lot more spending in crucial election years, like 1972, it got them.
The part I'm most confident about the candidates who are running, for the most part, and the people who will be on the ballot in 20 is that the things that we talk about, we're going to be in the offense to talk about what we can do from a pragmatic standpoint, and the right is going to go full steam to their side.
You're also a very pragmatic guy yourself, and you want to win.
I do want to win.
And you cannot believe this strategy of piling spending on top of spending, and then somehow calling it an investment, I think as Kamala Harris did, is a winner.
But you're making the assumption that some of these policies and some of these candidates are going to get across the finish line first. Now,
I don't know. What I'm saying is when they all, to a man or woman, espouse them, maybe then just to get
there's not a candidate out there that hasn't said the Green Deal is a good deal. I mean, right?
Sure, it is. Amy Klobuchar has. That's very pragmatic.
They have to. Maybe you meant it in reverse. They all support it, but they have different degrees of how much it can be afforded.
But look at the gut impulse. The gut impulse is to just jump on the liberal bandwagon before you even have time to read the details.
That's not true.
You're going to see that for the next year. Look, Democrats are.
So you think that they gave? That is, Democrats gave Republicans a gift.
It's a huge gift. Look, you see this with AOC and this list.
Disagree.
If you look at it like in the terms of cannibalism, Democrats aren't even running out of food, and they're already turning on each other to eat each other.
I don't think it's a gift at all, and I think it's a mistake that the Republicans think this is a gift, because you know what? The Democrats now are setting the agenda, and we're responding to it, and that is not good. The Republicans need to be setting the agenda, and the Democrats need to be responding.
But why wouldn't you want to get out there right away? If you don't like Donald Trump or you don't like Republicans, look what the alternative will be. What's wrong with stating a lot of the big spending plans? Whether you agree or disagree, but that approach in this environment with a strong economy, low unemployment rate, is probably not the prescription.
You can't define the Democratic Party voices by a few people who own the choir, and that's the complication for you all. Look, I think candidates.
Look at the criticism Van Jones got. Look at the criticism Van Jones got for speaking or saying some good things about Republicans on criminal justice at CPAC, as a guest at CPAC. Look at the criticism Joe Biden is getting for simply commenting that the vice president's a decent guy. That's where the nuts are taken off.
Van Jones' comments and Joe Biden comments were totally different. Look, I'm
not. The base turns on them for even saying something.
But that's who Joe Biden is. He's known. He spoke at Strom Thurmond's funeral in South Carolina. Like, that's who he is.
I understand.
That's who he is. However, the Van Jones is different. Look, Democrats have been talking about criminal justice reform long before Trump came in office.
What he was bemoaning was that the Republicans somehow seized that initiative under President who signed this criminal justice. I'm not saying you have to agree or disagree. He was lamenting that, and it's ticking him off.
Cavuto, what he did not do was give Cory Booker and Kamala.
He did
not give Kamala Harris and Cory Booker credit for being the legislative branch and really pushing this through, because without them, there would be no Trump.
You know, Antoine, what I would say, you don't do that. And all I'm saying, you don't treat people that way. You don't get in the mud pit here.
I don't.
And I'm saying what is going to cost. And by the way, Republicans have done the same when they were rabid with their anger at President Obama, and they let it get the better of them in a year they could have won in 2012. So both parties play this, but I think the Democrats are at risk with a lot of this push in reaction to candidates who are simply having a human being reaction, they are grabbing defeat from the jaws of victory.
But what choice do they have, Neil? I mean, the other choice for Democrats is to try to make the economic argument, the one that usually does drive voters. It moves the needle. But Democrats will have a hard time trying to convince voters that what's up is actually down, that the economy is not doing well, that the economy is not doing well for regular people, especially in those states that they need to win again. What are they offering? You're right. So they are sort of setting an agenda. But what are they offering people in the Midwest with the Green New Deal? I mean, it's absurd to think that
But if you can bring out a base that wasn't there for them, and bring out...
Well, the argument was that Hillary Clinton won with so many more votes. How many new...
But our party has expanded.
Where is the base
our party has expanded. You look at what happened in the midterms.
You see Van Jones in our party.
Independent thinkers are, I think, are coming more under our tent than they are your tent if you look at what happened in the midterms. So you can make the argument about the economy, but guess what? When people went to the polls in the midterms and you all were singing the song about the economy, you know what people were saying? Healthcare.
No, you're right about that. You're absolutely right
about that. It's
how
Democrats will define what.
But I will say that in a presidential election year, the economy and how it's doing is more of a factor. Wouldn't you acknowledge that?
I disagree. I think it's all about how we frame
How many
the
midterms
argument.
have we lived through? I have ties older than you. I mean,
you may.
If there was a place to sign up, basing the 2020 race on the economy.
There we go.
I think, though, that the Republicans need to come up with a plan on health care if they're going to win in 2020. It is a very important issue to American people. And you've got to say, well, that's a
the
given.
Democrats are dropping the ball on that one, too, though.
How so?
Well,
what's the plan?
We're doing a 180 on what they said before.
We want to do comprehensive immigration reform.
And Republicans don't?
To include taking care of dreamers long term, not the short term fix that your party wants. To include giving money towards border security.
You used to be for funding, wall funding. Used to be for beefed up security along the border.
We've always been for border security.
So don't just blame Republicans for being too fast and loose with this. When both sides.
I think this time around, you guys have dropped the political.
Mr. Cavuto, the president's not a fan of mine.
If we can agree to base the 2020 race on the economy and immigration, I think we take the deal tomorrow.
All right, so what happens at this is both sides try to get their bases in order. You follow crowds and what they're doing, where they're lining up. The president is the most popular with his party, the Republican Party, than any, certainly post-World War II, Republican nominee. So where does he go with that?
Look, I think that this is the interesting thing about the president is he only campaigns to his people. He is like laser focused on his target market, and that is what he is going to do. And that is he's going to rally them and energize them.
Is that enough? Is that enough?
It could be. I mean, look, if the president's popularity is increasing as it has, if he gains 5 points in popularity from where he was, so if he needs to gain another 2 or 3 points, he's going to be unbeatable.
The difference is people have voters' remorse. I see it when I talk to independent thinkers, independent voters. Well, I agree with you. His base is going to be rock solid. They're not going to waver. They will never fold. But independent thinkers and independent voters, I think, will look at this race a little different.
I resent to say that independent thinkers won't follow.
I said they will look at it differently.
I think everything you said is correct.
Mark my word. Look at what I said. They will look at it differently.
But I do think that it's really hard for anybody outside of his base and outside of that bubble to understand it, because it is so ingrained. It is so embedded. They are so excited. They are so enthused that somebody is finally fighting for them, and they are not going to walk away from it. If he can just convince about 5% more people that his plans, that his policies are worth following,
and everything Lee said is correct. And the problem for Democrats is that
Antoine said.
It worked. Well, Antoine is like Haley's Comet. It's right every 70-something years, right?
Even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Oh, you're intact, my friend. You're intact. But everything she said is right. The problem is that it actually worked. It actually won the states a Republican needs to win in order to win the presidency. And Democrats.
But he is trailing right now. Not that it means anything to Antoine's earlier point.
He was getting killed in 2016.
I understand, but he is trailing in a lot of those states that tip the electoral map. Now that could change. I think.
And guess what? The electorate is different, I think, than it was in 2016 in the sense if you saw what happened during the midterms in some of those places where he did well, like the Rust Belt, Democrats have really put a strong footprint down. If you look at Wisconsin, we have the governor's mansion, Michigan, Pennsylvania. All those places look a little different than they were in 16, and the mood of the country is different.
It is, but it's all going to come down to who the candidate is on the left.
I don't
think there's no question
about it. And if you get a Schultz who runs as a third party, it's a very different.
It could put a hole in our tire.
Oh, I see. All right, we're going to go back to CPAC and see what's going on. Now they're showing a film right now going through this lamenting about socialism and everything that Antoine wants to do to destroy the country. Then they're going to hear from the President of the United States. More after this.
People with type 2 diabetes are excited about the potential of once-weekly Ozempic. In a study with
communism, that's what happened, but then it didn't work, and America is working so well, and all these places failed. You're showing footage of Venezuela, and the European countries are getting rid of the wealth taxes. Like, it just doesn't really work anymore.
Yeah, and have we forgotten about the Soviet Union? I mean, have we already forgotten about that?
It didn't work. It's a lost cause.
Yeah, let me tell you what I like about both of these guys and what I don't like. Number one, each of them keep their message very simple. And that's why I think both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders have this mass appeal. What I don't like is they speak to the negative side so much. As we've been talking about, Bernie Sanders, if you didn't know any better, you would think we were in a Great Depression. And, of course, Donald Trump seems to be stuck on the wall, and he always goes back to that and all these bad people trying to get into our country. Now, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea that our country has borders, but think about how he communicates it. It's very simple, but it's also very negative, and both of these candidates do that.
Does Sanders tweet? I guess he does, a little bit.
He doesn't have the AOC snap on the Twitter.
Oh, I see. I see. One of the things the president's going to try to remind people about is if this particular crowd at CPAC needs the reminding, Aaron, is that the points that you mentioned, and also the markets, they're going more his way, although he doesn't mention the markets quite as much as he used to. But how does that play into the psyche? I mean, markets can be very strong and still not help the party in power. So it just depends, I guess.
Yeah, because it's part of it is that wealth effect and consumer confidence, and that can certainly help. Right now, what we've just seen so far, this is just truly a snapback of undoing the fourth quarter carnage. And so I don't think...
We're almost back to within 4% or so, the Dow.
Yeah, and it's all the markets that did the worst, like your small caps, your tech stocks, they're the ones that have rebounded the most. So it's actually been an almost like perfect inverse correlation of those that got hit the hardest in the fourth quarter have rebounded the most. So you actually really don't want to talk about it because it has nothing to do with, it's just a rebound, right? So we really want to focus on what's going to happen in the markets for the rest of the year because, okay, now we've undone sort of the carnage of fourth quarter.
Well, we're not any more savvy now. What's going on now is the correction of what was an aberration last December, right? So we don't know which is real.
It's a rebound with a reason. I mean, the economy looked like it was going into a recession interest rates are plunging. Global economy is very weak. The global economy is still pretty weak. And we're seeing better data than we were expecting to see on every earnings, unemployment, GDP. It's all slightly better than was the path things looked to be on. So now you could argue that markets come back too strong, 10 weeks straight of NASDAQ going up, but it is there for a reason. We're not teetering into a recession right now. It seems like that could change in a few quarters, but right now it was an overreaction, that 20%, just like 2011 when the market fell 20% and then came back.
I would disagree in that the fundamentals actually looked a little better in the fourth quarter because when you actually look at sort of profitability expectations going into this year, the expectations have been cut in half. So we've had this huge rebound.
Isn't it expected to be a contraction?
Yeah. Exactly. So right now we're actually expecting to make less money, yet the markets have rebounded. So
I think it's all about what they get their frame of mind around, right? They don't like to be surprised on the downside. They're happy to be surprised on the upside. But I think they've gotten their arms around that, haven't they? That this could be slower than the fourth quarter, slower than the third quarter, slower than the second quarter. So progressively, the momentum has slipped a little, right?
Yeah, I think investors are preparing themselves for what isn't going to be so great. I think what the average American right now is starting to pay attention to are their tax returns, because there was a lot of talk about the tax plan and what was going to happen and how that was going to play out for everybody was going to be, or most